This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Labor Day 2013 finds much of the nation finally focused on income disparities and the plight of minimum wage workers. Our guests today speak directly to those issues. Longtime union leader Paul Booth says the fight progressives must make is not only about good wages, but good wedges, framing our concerns in terms of winning wedge issues. Economist John Schmitt takes us through the history of the minimum wage fight. And Bill Press talks with University of Virginia's Larry Sabato about that state's race for governor. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Labor Day commemorates the contributions of America's working men and women, and a leader of the Government Workers Union, Paul Booth, says that just being right on issues isn't enough. You have to use language to win the message war. And joining us now on AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Paul Booth is executive assistant to the president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Workers. Formerly organizing director of the union, he has played a key role in many important labor initiatives, including forging labor unity in response to the attacks on worker rights after the 2010 election. Paul Booth, thank you so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you recently wrote an article for a Democratic Party readership that looks at the 2016 election from the point of view of Republicans. What's the purpose of that exercise?
I put myself in the shoes of a Republican political operative post-election. And I did it as I wanted to call attention to my Democratic Party colleagues and friends that we should not engage in premature triumphalism. We should not assume that the outcome of the 2012 election settles for once and for all that we're now the majority, and I don't want anybody resting the way we did after 2008.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you're running the Republican campaign in 2016, and for just a moment, pretend you're Karl Rove.
Oh my goodness!
and who knows? The rest of this interview may not go well. But what would you have to do to win? More voter suppression, attempts to change how electoral votes are awarded. I mean, you're Karl Rove. You're running the Republican campaign in 2016. What do you do?
Well, I tried to, by putting myself in those shoes, I tried to scope that out. And of course, you know that the Republicans have engaged in what they call their autopsy and have come up with a big report that has a lot of fairly candid insights in it. But I don't think they went far enough. So if I was Rove, I'd look back at what we tried to do for 2012 and why it fell short. So let's talk that through.
Sure.
We know they engaged in voter trying to change the rules of who gets to vote, and we know that didn't get them the win that they wanted it to have in Florida, particularly. That's a place where they went most aggressively, where litigation and just bold determination to do voter registration thwarted their effort to close the doors of voting rights in that state, and that was only carried by 60,000 votes. So they and we remember that same state in the year 2000, where the whole turned on the way those votes were counted. So I think Rove is right in encouraging Republicans to continue to try to mess with the electoral system, to try to mess with who gets to vote and when polls are open, because that's for a minority party, and Republicans are on the threshold of really being a minority party, trying to prevent the majority from getting to the polls has obviously got to be a strategy, but it's obviously not good enough. They have to do two other things, in my opinion. One of them is they have to continue to strike at the constituencies that make our side powerful, and they've been trying to cripple the American labor movement. They try to cripple trial lawyers. They try to they've gone after Planned Parenthood and failed, but tried to knock it out of the game. They've failed to knock labor out of the game, but they've inflicted some really serious blows. So that kind of offense, I expect they're going to continue, and we have to be on our guard, and we have to be vigilant, we have to fight back on that. That's two things. But the third thing is they've got to find new ways to drive wedges into our potential majority. You know, they have a history of finding wedge issues and exploiting them. And we're now seeing the exhaustion of many of their old wedge issues, the exhaustion of the hatred that they tried to stir up and turn into an electoral advantage against gays, the exhaustion of the hatred that they tried to stir up and use for electoral advantage against immigrants. Both of those seem to have petered out as a electoral strategy. They've got to come up with some new ones. They've got to find some wedges to drive into our constituencies, or they stand a very good chance of being made a permanent minority.
We're speaking with Paul Booth, Executive Assistant to the President of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Workers. All right, so now we'll put you in a different role. Let's say you're the chief Democratic strategist in 2016. What would you have to do to win or keep the ball rolling, if you will?
Well, I would like to start taking the same lessons and applying them in just the opposite manner. Anything we can do to expand the electorate, to make it easier for people to vote, to make it possible for people to get registered and stay permanently registered or be automatically registered, just as a result of consequence of being citizens of the United States. I think we should be for that. Number two, let's skip right to wedge issues. Let's find us some wedge issues that actually drive into the Republican coalition. And there's one obvious one. Obviously, there's this big gap inside the Republican Party between the Tea Party strategists and the mainstream big business conventional Republican side, and they're currently fighting for who gets to pick the nominees, and up and down the whole Republican structure. There is that battle. We don't have I don't have any. I don't think we have a right to try to pick that winner. I think we should just be spectators in that battle. But when I talk about finding wedge issues, the purpose is to find people who are currently attracted to the Republican side who can be brought over to the other side. And so I think we have to look to what I call the other emerging electorate, that is to say people my age, senior citizens, and we've got to keep working to bring the senior vote or a larger fraction of it back to our side. It's evenly split and has been for the last couple of elections, and it's a very, very big voter bloc. And seniors do vote. They vote in higher proportion than any other age group. And the last election, both sides tried to take the Medicare issue and turn it to advantage. In the case of the Republicans, they drilled home the number $716 billion, a totally phony number, but they spent a lot of money on television trying to scare seniors into thinking that it was Obama who was trying to cut Medicare. And we told the American voters about the Ryan budget over and over again, and I think we had a good impact on that. And the net result of all of that was a draw. That's not good enough. Seniors, retirement in America, retirement security in America ought to be our issue. It ought to be an issue that we can work not only for people who are 65 and over, but for people who are going to be, who are trying to plan for retirement. And the way the Bush and Reagan policies have wrecked the promise of safe and secure retirement, the way Bush tried to undermine the Social Security system itself, we know Paul Ryan would still like to do that, and the destruction of the conventional pension system. We have a big upside among senior voters. I just cite that for as one example of a group that where we can drive wedges that actually bring people to us. That's good wedges, not bad wedges.
Sure. All right. So the Republican chairman, Reince Priebus, recently conducted, and you referred to this earlier on in our discussion, he conducted an autopsy of his party's presidential election loss and concluded that their policies are sound, but their language needs modernizing. What's your view of that analysis?
I don't discount the fact that their language needs modernizing. I don't agree with their policies. Their policies have been a great point of unity for them. They have and it has worked for them, their policy. So I can see why they want to hang on to the things that have held them together. Their relentless opposition to taxes, to public spending, even for public services that most Americans want. They've tried to say, well, you can have those services, you just don't have to pay for them. And that's been a cheap and effective way for them to get to win some elections. So I think that they're going to stick with the policy framework they've developed, and I think they'll try to put a finer gloss on it with new language. And I think that the reason that that's an insufficient answer to their problem is that the majority of American voters are looking for answers on issues that they do not have an answer. Majority of American voters would like to prioritize the question of jobs and getting out of the recession that will linger in. And there's no Republican policy that even speaks to that question.
Well, that's there's the problem I have, is because if all you're going to do is change the language, to me that's like putting lipstick on a pig.
I think that is pig. That's right. I'd go along with that metaphor. But, in politics, you can go a long way with just a fancy language. Elections have been won not on substance, but on rhetoric and slogans. They've been pretty good at it and have gotten away with it. And just being right on the issues does not win you elections. You should know. We have to understand that. We have to understand that being right and not communicating well doesn't get you anywhere. And part of communicating well is creating the army of hardworking volunteers that displayed itself so much better on our side than on their side in the last election. I criticized their so-called autopsy because they didn't really come up with a proper analysis of their shortcomings in motivating people to do the kind of hard work that actually can help you win elections.
Sure.
The ground operation that the Obama team fielded was first rate, and it reflected the kind of serious investment in communicating one-on-one with voters 24 months in advance of the election. There were people on board in 2011 for the 2012 election, and the Republican side just failed to staff up and to motivate and mobilize and adequately use the volunteers that they probably had available to them if they'd been more careful and systematic about it. And so there have been 250,000 more Republican volunteers knocking on doors in some of these battleground states. Even with a second-rate message, they might have made this much more difficult election for us to have won, and that's a lesson that I think their autopsy didn't adequately reflect.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if that even changes as soon as the midterm elections. A lot of progressive commentators have acknowledged that Democrats have lost the message wars in the last 40 years. Are there issues now that are turning in the Democrats' favor, you think?
Well, there are some issues that are turning in our favor. That's not the same thing as winning the message wars. That's the point I was trying to stress before. But certainly the shift of public opinion about international issues has taken away from the Republicans what used to be one of their natural advantages, being the national security party. The shift of public opinion on marriage equality, a tremendously rapid shift of public opinion on that, has taken away a wedge issue from that had been used by the Republicans to their advantage. The shift of public opinion that I would like to see, but that I don't think that we're yet in a position to say that we know how to do it, is a shift in public opinion about the importance of government and public services in our common culture and in our life, in our lives together. Republicans have had the better of the argument if the argument is between individualism versus collaboration and cooperation. Even though both of those values are dear values to Americans and have always been that way, but in a straight shootout between the ways of talking about them that have been tried over the last few decades, the you're on your own individualism of the Republicans have had a better showing. We've got to overcome that. That's a tough one, but we're all going to have to work together to overcome that.
Okay. Paul Booth, Executive Assistant to the President of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Workers, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Paul, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks very much.
All right. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. If you work for McDonald's, are you better off in Peoria or in Paris? Economist John Schmitt gives us the answer, and that's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Webster's Dictionary says that Labor Day was set aside for special recognition of working people. How nice. But set aside by whom? Certainly not by the Wall Street, corporate, and political powers that be. They nearly swallowed their $100 cigars when the idea of honoring labor's importance to America's economy and social well-being was first proposed in 1882. Rather, this holiday was created by working people themselves in a 12-year political struggle that culminated with an act of Congress in 1894. The campaign helped coalesce old and emerging unions into a national movement, but it also countered the haughty insistence of the robber barons of that time that they were America's makers, the invaluable few whose monopolistic pursuits must be unfettered, for corporations are the God-ordained creators of wealth. Labor Day put both political symbolism and organized muscle behind Abraham Lincoln's conviction that the real makers are the many ground-level workers who actually do the making. Labor is prior to and independent of capital, Abe declared in his first State of the Union address. Capital is only the fruit of labor, and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital and deserves much the higher consideration. Yet, on this Labor Day, robber barons are again ascendant, declaring that they owe no shared prosperity to the American people who sustain them. They are blithely shredding America's social contract and again insisting that the corporate elite must be unfettered, unions eliminated, and middle-class jobs Walmarted. This is Jim Hightower saying their deliberate hollowing out of our middle class is not just ignorant, but immoral and dangerous. After all, even a dog knows the difference between being stumbled over and being kicked.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor. All for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Economist John Schmitt explains how the productivity of American workers has gone up since World War II and how steeply wages have fallen in comparison. He answers the question of where in the world the McDonald's worker does better. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, John Schmitt is a senior economist with the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. He has written extensively on economic inequality, unemployment, labor market institutions, and other topics for both academic and popular audiences. John Schmitt, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Now, the minimum wage now, I guess it's $7.25, right?
That's right, the federal level.
How long has it been there? What are the chances of it being increased?
Well, the last time we had an increase in the minimum wage were 3 series of increases that went into effect in July of 2007, 2008, and 2009. And since then, the minimum wage has been frozen at $7.25. I think now there are several proposals that are in the air. President Obama has proposed increasing the minimum wage to $9 per hour, and Senator Tom Harkin and Representative George Miller have proposed increasing the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. Both of them, I think, are getting a big airing, a lot of discussion. I think there's a lot of excitement around both of those proposals. The question is how much of a chance they have in the current Congress of getting through. And I think, if there's enough momentum and enough push, there certainly is enough popular support for them, there's a chance that could go through sometime either this Congress or the next.
Now, you have written a great deal about the disparity between what workers are paid and how much they contribute to productivity. Tell us a little bit, if you would, about how big that gap is and how it came to pass.
Well, I think if you go back to the end of World War II, when the U.S. economy that we live in today was basically kind of constructed in that early post-war period, the productivity of the average U.S. worker, so productivity is the amount of goods and services that a worker produces in 1 hour of time on average across all workers in the economy. What you'll see is that productivity increased basically at 2 or 3% a year over that time, and so did the wages of the average worker. They were moved almost in lockstep. So when the economy got richer, workers got richer. What started to happen in the 1970s, and particularly by the end of the 1970s, it was quite striking, is that link between what the average worker produced and what the average worker got broke. And productivity continued to grow, albeit at a slower pace than it had before, but wages all but flattened out at the average. I mean, they continued to increase, but at a much slower pace. And the big question, I think, is why that happened. And economists tend to say that it's because workers failed to continue to upgrade their skills, and the new economy made all sorts of demands on workers that they weren't able to follow through with. I'm very skeptical of that view. I think workers have continued to increase their skills acquisitions. We have lots of people who have college degrees. We have far fewer people today that didn't finish high school than was the case in the 1970s, and we tend to forget that. I think the problem is that we've changed the way the economy is organized, and I think we've made it much harder for workers at the middle and the bottom to have bargaining power relative to their employers. And that, I think, is what's key. The economy has been restructured in a way that makes workers much less powerful relative to their employers than was the case in the past, and I think that's the whole story.
Now, some of the numbers that you brought up of some of that have been put forward as to where to put the minimum wage from that $7.25 jumping up to $10 and that sort of thing. Even if Congress wanted to raise the minimum wage, I'm assuming that it would still have to be done in stages over a period of years, like we saw the last increase. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the case that if all of a sudden the minimum wage went from say $7.25 an hour to $16 or $17, which is where it would be on at least one projection of where it would be if we had kept pace with with productivity since the late 1960s. If we did that overnight, I think that would be extremely difficult for low-wage employers, for employers to match those wages. But I think any increase that we've done in the past and every increase that we're considering doing right now is something that tends to be phased in moderate chunks. So the minimum wage might go up 8% or 10% or 12%, and then phased in over, say, 2 or sometimes 3 years in the most recent increase. Those kinds of increases are the kinds of things that employers can work into their business plan in the same way that they can figure out what's going to happen if rent goes up or what's going to happen if the cost of energy goes up. It squeezes them, it puts them under some pressure, but it's something that good business people who know how to deal with shocks to their business can cope with. And we know from enormous amount of experience with the minimum wage that when the minimum wage goes up in these moderate amounts that are phased in and people have a little bit of a heads up, it seems to have no impact at all on employment. So I think that's the way forward.
We're speaking with John Schmitt, senior economist with the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. John, is it likely that it could ever be indexed to inflation or productivity gains?
Yeah, I think it's actually very likely that it will at some point be indexed to inflation. We have 19 states right now that have minimum wages that are above the federal level, and I believe 10 or 11 of them have indexing to overall inflation. And I think the states have recognized that, particularly when you index to inflation, you take a lot of the uncertainty out of the future wages for low-wage workers, because inflation typically goes up 1%, 2%, 3% per year, and that's a kind of regular increase in wages that employers can factor in, and they know what's going to happen. There is some amount of uncertainty, obviously. If you let the minimum wage erode for 10 years, as we've done twice in the last 3 decades, when the increase comes around, it tends to be, pretty big and all of a sudden relative to what it would be if we had been keeping pace 1 or 2 or 3% a year.
What keeps the big companies from just going overseas to cheaper labor? Because that's kind of a common argument that you hear.
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind is that the minimum wage is almost irrelevant to the manufacturing sector, and those are the kinds of jobs that can be relocated overseas. I think the minimum wage is overwhelmingly something that's relevant to a lot of low-wage service sector jobs where there is a direct connection between the workers and the customers. So it's fast food restaurants or regular restaurants or cleaning services for big office buildings. Those are the kinds of jobs that need to be done in person and in place, and they're just not realistically jobs that are open to relocating overseas or offshoring in any way. So I just don't think that that's a consideration. I think why the big companies oppose a minimum wage increase is because it's going to hurt their bottom line. It's going to involve them having to shift some of their money from profits into wages, or from wages of high-wage workers and into the wages of low-wage workers. I think that's where the opposition comes from. It's not a concern about relocating overseas.
Okay. Now, how much is the American economy in danger of falling behind other countries and thus causing a loss of more jobs?
Well, it is very striking how low wages are in the U.S. at the bottom relative to our competitors, and not just wages but compensation. So, if you compare a McDonald's worker, just to give a specific example of a multinational corporation that works in the United States, not only are their wages lower than a McDonald's worker in France or Germany or Britain, but what's quite Britain, for example, even though it's a poorer country than the United States, has a higher minimum wage and a dollar value basis than we do. It's not just a wage difference, but also, low-wage workers in other countries actually have health insurance, whether it's provided by their employer or provided by the government. They have universal health insurance. They also are covered by labor law overwhelmingly in a way that's not the case here. So, for example, low-wage workers in a McDonald's in other countries will have 20 paid vacation days per year guaranteed by law in the European Union, for example. They'll have guaranteed paid sick days, which is not required by U.S. law either. They'll have guaranteed social insurance to provide for parental leave when they have a kid. So there are vast differences between what we offer in the United States and what not much poorer, but somewhat poorer countries offer in the rest of the world. So, I think it's not just a quick case that we might in the future fall behind. For large chunks of workers in the United States, we've already fallen behind what the rest of the world provides. And I think that that's particularly crazy given how rich we are as a country and how much richer we are now than we were 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. I think we have a belief that somehow we're poorer than we were at the end of the 1970s. That's why we have to cut back. Or we're poorer than we were in the 1960s, and that's why we need to make these changes and reforms. The truth is the exact opposite. We're twice as rich as on a per-person basis as we were in the 1960s, and we're something on the order of 60 or 70% richer than we were at the end of the 1970s. It's just that the distribution of that has gotten way out of line, and almost all the benefits of growth over the last 3 decades have gone to the very top. And that's, I think, where the problem lies.
Raising the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, is popular, obviously, with the citizens of the country, but also with pretty much everybody in Congress. Why isn't it getting done? It's been 4 years since we've had a raise.
Well, I think, as you say, it's a very popular policy. We have consistently large majorities in polls, including Republicans, who are in favor of increasing the minimum wage. The difficulty is that I think in Congress it becomes very hard because there is a very strong lobbying opposition to increasing the minimum wage. It comes from a few of the organizations that represent large amounts of low-wage employers, and they're the people who are going to get hit on the bottom line by wage increases. It's just an unfortunate aspect of the way our political system works that money talks a little bit louder than people. It doesn't always do that, and minimum wage does go up from time to time, and it goes up because people organize and people put pressure, and the timing gets right, and then it happens. But I do think it's not because it's not a good policy. It's not because there's not a lot of support. It's because it undermines the interests of a particular but powerful sector in the economy, and those organizations prevail most of the time, but not all of the time.
The gridlock in Washington is like the blob. It just seems to go. It grows much further out than Washington now, I guess.
Yeah, no, and we see that states have actually taken the kind of reins in all of this and kind of pushed ahead on the minimum wage when the federal government has fallen behind. So we have, as I said, 19 states that have a minimum wage that's higher than the federal minimum wage, and they've done that mostly out of frustration with where it's been set or how infrequently it's been increased at the federal level.
Okay. John Schmitt, senior economist with the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. John, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're quite welcome. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, University of Virginia professor Larry Sabato.
Well, we know that politics never gets ugly. It is always civilized, as Dr. Larry Sabato would tell us. We've never seen any ugly name-calling in politics at all. Larry Sabato is director of the Center for Politics down at the University of Virginia and author of the new book. Well, it's about to come out in October, as his latest book, The Kennedy Half Century, I have a copy right on the top of my stack of next books to read at home. Larry Sabato, good morning.
Good morning, Bill.
Haven't cracked it yet, but looking forward to it.
You'll get a finished copy as well. That's just the draft you got there. We saved the really good stuff for October.
Oh, all right, great. Hey, Larry, while we're at that, and you're offering an online course about the Kennedy years, too?
Yes, this is a big new trend in higher education. It's called a MOOC, Massive Open Online Course, and you can sign up through Coursera.org. We're expecting about 100,000 people to sign up for it. It's all by video. You can take it between October 21st and November 22nd. You have a couple of hours of video a week and some reading and little quizzes and that kind of thing. Although they have a new aspect to it. You can also sign up just to watch the video. You don't actually have to take the class. But this will be about the Kennedy presidency, the assassination, and the 50 years since, how Kennedy has affected the 9 presidents who succeeded him.
Well, how do you sign up for it? What's the?
You just go to Coursera.org. Coursera, Coursera.org. Coursera.org. It's all totally free. If you actually complete the course, you get a certificate of completion. You know, that plus $1.50 will get you a very small cup of coffee. But, you know, it's about education, Bill, and that's what you do every morning.
I love it. We'll put a link up on our website, Coursera.org. I love it. But it's a MOOC. Never heard of that phrase before.
MOOC, yeah, Massive Open Online Course. We've got a trailer that I sent to you. You'll love that trailer.
Okay.
I was about to ask if we get a PhD from UVA.
Sure, that comes after the third MOOC.
Okay.
You've got to finish 3 of them.
No, well, let's put that link up and the video on our website. We'll do that. We'll do that. So, governor's race in Virginia getting more interesting by the day. How's it look to you, Larry?
Right now, I think it's tipping Democratic. You know, it's not that it's pretty, as you noted. It's nasty. It's negative. It's vicious. I don't think either candidate is distinguishing himself by the way he's conducting the campaign. But, you know, in the end, you have a winner. I mean, who cares? In a sense, people forget about the campaign. And, look, it's boiling down to this. Neither one of them is much liked, but one of them is turning out to be more unacceptable than the other. Virginia is a moderate state. We've seen that with President Obama carrying it twice. The real danger for the Democrats is low turnout. But it seems that the Republican ticket is far enough to the right so that it's generating enough Democratic turnout. Now, you know, am I going to call the race today? Of course not. I don't know whether Bob McDonald's going to be indicted, for example. There are loads of things that are remaining out there that could affect this race dramatically. But Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic nominee, former DNC chair, close pal of the Clintons, he's got more money. He's going to have considerably more money to spend, even counting super PACs, than the Republican Ken Cuccinelli. He's presenting a more moderate image on social issues and, of course, attacking Cuccinelli and his conservative ticket on social issues. And to this point, his scandals on, say, green tech and some of his corporate ventures seem to be doing less damage than the McDonald scandal to which Cuccinelli is connected. That is, they got money and gifts from the same source, though Cuccinelli got a lot less.
You know, I must say, as you point out, it's not a very enlightening campaign from what I've seen, right?
Oh, it's awful.
You know, and living in Washington, D.C., of course, we see the ads for the Virginia governor's race because that's the Virginia media market. And, you know, it's the McAuliffe ad accusing Cuccinelli of being such an extreme right-winger, and the Cuccinelli ads accusing McAuliffe of being an untrustworthy businessman, right, who took a plant of Mississippi instead of building it in Virginia. I mean, it's all negative stuff.
The social extremist versus the flim-flam artist.
Yeah.
Look, I've been around a long time like you, Bill. I started following Virginia governor's races in 1965. This is the worst. Okay?
Yeah.
And often people say that, and they really don't have a grasp of history. Well, I think I do have the grasp of history. It's the worst.
Another governor's race about to come. Nikki Haley announced that she's going to run for re-election in South Carolina. Why is this race considered so important for Republicans?
Well, she's weak for a Republican in South Carolina. She didn't win by that much in 2010, which was the Tea Party year. Now, look, no analyst worth his salt is going to tell you that a Democrat's going to get elected governor in South Carolina in a midterm year. And she's an incumbent, but I'll tell you, I'll bet it's a tougher race for her than the Republicans think it's going to be. Notice she surrounded herself with national Republicans.
Yes,
Bobby Jindal and Scott Walker came in for,
and Rick Perry.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Rick Perry came in for, I guess to show the people of South Carolina other governors goof up too.
Right, exactly. I thought it was interesting that the party sees there's a lot at stake here, right?
Yeah. Well, they want to. I mean, that's one of their strongholds. My God, as the country has moved more Democratic in the Electoral College, South Carolina's been moving more Republican, though that will change with demographic trends over time.
Now, you've been writing a lot about, again, we're talking to Larry Sabato, author of the forthcoming book, The Kennedy Half Century, director of the Center for Politics, centerforpolitics.org at the University of Virginia. You've been writing a lot about 2016. Does it surprise you that Ted Cruz seems to have emerged as one, all Republicans are counting on, or at least he's out there?
I'm surprised he's running. I mean, he just got elected to the Senate. This is very interesting because we've seen outsider strategies before, but rarely like this. I mean, he's so outside the club, he's practically not in the Senate. And that's his strategy, is to be unconnected to anybody with power, even though he's got power.
Yeah, he's even eclipsed Marco Rubio, at least for the moment, right?
Yeah,
as a Tea Party favorite.
That's his objective, is to go right of Rubio and right of Scott Walker and right of anybody else who's running, and Rand Paul, who, remember, Rand Paul is supporting Mitch McConnell.
Right.
Who isn't supporting his senior senator who's running for re-election in Texas? Cruz. He's not supporting John Cornyn.
But now we know the American public is not that far right. Is the Republican Party that far right?
That's the question. That's the question. This party has been in some cases moving headlong to the right, in other cases drifting to the right as you look state by state. And the question arises, how far is too far? Well, it was too far in 2008, and it was too far in 2012. And look, how much further to the right can they go and still have a chance of winning a national election?
Wait, when you talk about Ted Cruz running for president, are you talking about Canada?
Look, don't you blame Canada. I'm not going to listen to this South Park stuff on the Bill Press show. Don't you blame Canada.
Oh, boy. Yeah, he was quick to disassociate himself. He dropped that Canadian citizenship.
And they have a great health care system.
I think they do. You and I probably disagree on that, but at any rate. Hey, Larry, always great. Congratulations again on the new book, The Kennedy Half Century, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, and take the MOOC. Check our website on how to sign up for the MOOC.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Paul Booth, John Schmitt, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org